Class is live. Okay, go ahead.
Well, good evening and welcome to our first 21st Century Teaching and Learning Committee meeting for the 2016-17 school year. And we are presenting to you this evening via a very different mode. And we did experience just a few technical difficulties with that mode, so we appreciate your patience if you're viewing with us tonight. My name is Dr. Barbara Russell. I'm the Assistant Superintendent here for Perkiomen Valley. And with me this evening is Mrs. Sharon Ferrebee, 5th grade teacher at Evergreen. She's been a long-time teacher in the district. And we also have Mrs. Jessica Lester, who is producing for us. She's behind the camera, and she will also be helping to organize the questions and share them with us. We're really hoping that you engage this evening in the conversation. And the purpose of this evening's meeting, our topic of conversation, will be the new math resources that have been introduced this year at both the elementary and middle levels. And we're going to primarily focus this evening on the elementary level and the new Math in Focus resource. And we'd like to help you to understand the why of shifting to that resource, as well as what it means for your child this year. So what's going to be different for your child in mathematics this year? What will the flow of a lesson for him or her look like? And Mrs. Ferrebee will help us to dive even deeper into some of the vocabulary that's used as part of the Math in Focus program. It's different from everyday math. Some of the philosophy that is associated with the Math in Focus program. And these are significant aspects to this program, and we want to be sure that you're informed about it. So we're hoping that as we move through this, what we feel is a logical agenda about this new resource, Math in Focus, or entertain questions about the middle level resource, the Glencoe math resources, we hope that you will engage with us and ask questions so that you prompt us to address the things that you're thinking about. We're really interested in hearing your voice and learning about what you are thinking tonight. So thank you, Mrs. Ferrebee and Mrs. Lester, and thank you to all of you who have tuned in this evening. We will be archiving this video so that in the event you have friends or we have other community members who weren't able to tune in tonight, they'll be able to do that at a later date via our YouTube channel. So just to talk a little bit more about this whole mode of engaging you, we have learned that many in our community really appreciate digital means of communicating with them, whether it's via Facebook or Twitter, or this evening we are trying this live broadcast via our YouTube channel so that you'll be able to see this live this evening anytime between 6 and 7 or at a later date. And we're hoping that you'll help us to know whether or not this works for you. But from the comfort of your own home, you can engage with us. And we're really hoping that you walk away this evening feeling better informed about the math resources. So why did we shift to Math in Focus? Just a little bit of background before we get into some of the details of this program and what it means for your children. There are a couple of reasons. I'll begin with the new state standards. The PA core standards are actually new standards that were adopted by Pennsylvania in 2014, and they reflect the ideas, the goals of the Common Core standards. Pennsylvania took their existing PA academic standards and actually married them to the Common Core standards, creating a new set of standards in mathematics and English language arts that we refer to as the PA core standards. And these standards are more challenging than the PA academic standards of the past, and with that means changes for us and for your children. Their learning targets, their learning expectations have also been raised. So they're much more challenging. There are more rigorous expectations associated with our curriculum since the implementation of these new standards. So we'll talk a little bit about that as we move through some of the details of the resource. We also had a mathematics programming review. Last year, during the course of the school year, there were committees and consultants that looked at our math programming, K-12, and what was happening for our students, how we were supporting our teachers, what resources we had in place. And From all of the data that was gathered and the conversations that were had as part of these committee meetings and the consulting, we realized that we need to update our resources. And that was something that we're appreciative of through our board of school directors. They actually took that report and worked with us in moving in the direction of updating our resources. Very appreciative of that, and we're excited to have this resource. Additionally, our students haven't been achieving where we know they can. And part of it, we believe, is due to some of the materials, some of the resources, some of the tools that we've been incorporating into their mathematics instruction and experiences. So again, we're hoping that this supports the learning experiences of your children, the efforts of our teachers, and you, because we know that parents in our community care very much about being partners with us in learning. And I think you'll find that the qualities, the characteristics of this Math in Focus program are such that you will be partners, you will be able to be partners. And I think with some support from us as we acclimate all of you to the resource, just as we're doing with our students and our staff, that you'll find it one that will work well for our students. So we're excited about that too. So that's some of the background as to why we shifted to a new resource. We've had Everyday Math in place for a very long time, upwards of 15 years or so. It has served us very well in the district. This shift we felt was very timely, and there were some very strong reasons for us to make the recommendation to our board and then this shift to a new resource. So we're excited to see how it supports our kids this year. So from there, and please, at any point, if you have questions, please feel free to share them. It'll help prompt us to know what to say and what to share with you, which direction we should go. We want to try and cover some of what we feel are the high priority topics or components connected to implementing a new resource, but you'll help us to do that, hopefully. So what we'd like to do is I'd like to actually shift the conversation and have Mrs. Ferrebee share a little bit with us about what are the experiences like for our students now with a new resource, and what is the organization of a mathematical learning experience that's recommended by this program, Math in Focus? How is it different from the everyday math experiences? And what do we need to think about as we transition our students from everyday math to Math in Focus? There are some differences, and we want to be cognizant of those throughout. So, Mrs. Ferrebee, can you help us to understand what it's like for a student who comes into math class today?
Sure.
What's different? What's the same? What is learning like?
I think one of the biggest differences is it's a shift from a spiral curriculum to a mastery program. So instead of having a unit that may just briefly touch upon a skill and then come back to that skill throughout the course of the year, it really focuses on one specific skill per chapter. So they call chapters and they're not units anymore. I think one of the things that does is it redirects what our focus needs to be when we begin that chapter, since it is a mastery chapter, and they'll begin with a pretest. So they'll begin by recalling some of their past knowledge on that particular skill. They'll give them a pretest. It allows us to kind of assess our class and determine whether or not the child might already have some background knowledge there or be secure in a specific skill to allow us to differentiate a little bit more.
Okay, so I heard some important keywords that I just want to emphasize a little bit, if I may. I heard mastery versus that spiral approach, so that our students will now be focusing upon a particular skill until they understand it and can demonstrate that they can apply that skill. That's really different from that spiraling approach in everyday math. And you also mentioned that there are pre-tests that will be administered regularly, which will help our teachers to differentiate and more effectively meet the needs of our students, in addition to those chapter tests. And again, we're referring to the segments in this resource as chapters and not units, as we did last year.
And I think one of the things is to understand they'll still move through the units and the chapters in the book and move to the next skill. It just allows us to see where their strengths and weaknesses are and provide other opportunities to practice and work on something that may not have been mastered previously.
Okay, good to know. Excellent. So when students come into class, let's talk a little bit about some of the things that I've observed already. Are that in math classrooms today, it's less often that I see a teacher in front of the classroom pointing to a whiteboard or modeling a problem. But instead, what I often observe are students seated in small groups or arranged in small groups conversing. There's a lot of student talk and much less teacher talk for at least portions of the lesson. Certainly our teachers are providing direct instruction. But let's talk about that shift a little bit and how Math in Focus encourages that, really capitalizes on the idea that students are collaborating.
And I think that's a big part of it. They try and steer away. We think of some of the more traditional approaches to solving problems, and you're going to see a little bit more of the traditional problem solving approaches to addition and subtraction. There's not partial quotients. You're not going to see those pieces anymore. However, what you will see, which we did have with Everyday Math, was some of the concrete, but this program focuses more with concrete objects than going to the pictures or the pictorial and then leading to the abstract, allowing students to discuss and work through a problem so they understand what they're doing from the very beginning, rather than just memorizing, I add in the ones, then I move to the tens and to the hundreds. They're really helping them to see the parts that they're working with so it makes sense, so that they're able to solve the more complex word problems.
Okay, and some of those exercises where they're working with their peers really help to develop those problem-solving skills and expose them to some of the rigorous problem-solving. You're going to hear a phrase, we're going to be promoting productive struggle. We really want our students to be challenged in math and be pushed, so that not everything necessarily comes easy to them either. So it's nice to hear that, and I think our students actually enjoy that. I mean, they seem to really be engaged and almost get very strong in their stance or their positions around why something is the way it should be.
And it allows them to tackle the topics with greater depth. So when they're looking at something, whether it's addition or fractions, you have that background knowledge with the concrete objects, but then allows them to go much more deeply into solving those complex problems while discussing it with partners, allowing them to have other ways of approaching it. So it's not just one particular way to solve it. There may be multiple ways that your partner comes up with, or that a group of students realize as they go through that productive struggle.
Nice. That's nice to hear. The idea that our students are thinking deeply and being encouraged to do so, prompted to do so by their peers, I think is very powerful. So wonderful to hear. The other thing I wanted to emphasize, because I think it's really important with this new resource, is that this resource strikes a different balance than what our previous resource did around the concrete problem-solving skills, or traditional algorithms, if you will, and time invested on fluency. Our students learning some of those basic addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division facts. So I think two things that are worthy of pointing out. Those traditional approaches are ones that many of us are more familiar with. You mentioned partial quotients is going away. I don't think anyone will be sad about that.
No, I don't either.
But I think there are some really, there's value to bringing back some of the traditional approaches for our students. We've recognized that for some of our students, this is what helps them to develop these math skills. And when they transition to middle school, it's often more of the type of problem-solving approach that they're used to experiencing. So that's something else that I think will support them as they move into middle school and then higher level mathematics. So let's talk about me as a student. You've got some really neat, colorful things here that are part of the manipulatives and the additional pieces that come with the resource beyond the textbook and the student workbook. So let's talk a little bit about these and how are students using these? How are teachers engaging students with some of these things? They're very colorful.
Right, and I think they're, as a teacher, when we were learning about them and we're sitting there, the first thing we looked at was, oh wow, look at the chips. Let's check these out. And they really help to create the visual of a student who's adding or subtracting or multiplying and dividing. And when you work through a unit or a particular lesson, it's going to start with what they call the learning aspect of the lesson. And that's where they have the hands-on and they're working with place value mats, and they can organize what they're adding. And then as they work through the manipulatives and the concrete part of it, then they'll go into the guided lesson part, and this may last a day, it may last more than one day, and here's where the teacher slowly pulls away. But what you'll observe is if a child is still struggling, we still keep these concrete objects out.
Okay.
We want them to have these while they still need them.
Nice.
And as we transition from the guided part of the lesson, you go into what they call the let's practice. And the let's practice is really the independent, and the program stresses that you don't tackle the independent part until they really understand what they're doing, because the let's practice part is meant to be independent. So by that phase of the lesson, the hope is that they understand and can manage that piece by themselves.
Okay, so we haven't abandoned that hands-on approach,
No.
which was so important to our students' learning experiences in the past. They will continue, and these colorful pieces are some of the things that they'll be using as they come to understand foundational
Right.
numbers and operations.
So
and
this would
concepts.
be a third grade lesson, and I'm not sure if it can be seen, but it helps a student kind of visualize what's happening. And they've had blocks before. They've had the cubes and the longs and the flats, which represented the place value. But what's nice about this is they're a little bit easier to manage. So you can see if I'm adding 162 to 52, I can see that I'm going to have 4. Then I realize, if I understand the concept, that once I have 10 tens, I need to trade that in for 100. I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, realize that I can now take them off, and I'm going to need that next 100. Now they can visually see it, and then the practice with that leads them into those next steps leading to the abstract.
And these manipulatives remain the same colors throughout grades K through 5?
Correct. It's a third grade placemat, but these are from the 5th grade sample of manipulatives, so it's going to remain the same.
Okay, so that consistency for our students is really
And
important.
these go into decimals as well, so it allows you to
Nice.
have other colors for decimals and then go into thousands and 10,000s and so on.
Excellent, great. So there's a couple of different very specific phrases. There's bar modeling, there's number bonds. Let's talk a little bit about those, because those are important phrases for our parents and our students to actually come to understand, because they'll be relying upon those terminologies and those approaches really quite a bit through this program.
And I think bar modeling is one of the most important, and it'll begin in 2nd grade, and it gradually gets more challenging with the more complex problems as you go through the grade level. And one of the things that we've been doing is introducing it to the students because of the transition, still making sure they're exposed to those strategies. And what it allows them to do is to visually see a challenging problem and represent the numbers. So a little bit different than the Unifix cubes, but what it allows them to do is take a problem, understand what it's asking, what they know, and then draw the relationship between what is known and what it's looking for in these bar models.
With these rectangular shapes.
Yes, they're long rectangles. I mean, you could hold these up and hold them very similar. So you would allow that if I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 here, and I know that, this person had 5, and this person, I sold 5 pieces of fruit the first day, 5 pieces of fruit the second day, how many was sold total? We would know that this bottom one represents the total, and I have to put these together to equal this, because there's an equal representation between it. And the great little thing is the 2 bar models create an equal sign. So you can visually represent that, and then they learn eventually how to just use one to still create the structure that they're looking for.
Okay, so this is a way for them to actually visualize some of the mathematical concepts and the actual the computations that are being carried out. And I should recognize Math in Focus, the full name of this resource is Math in Focus Singapore Math. So many of the approaches that are a part of this resource and the philosophy of the program originated in Singapore, where students have over time done very well mathematically. So some of the strategies that are a part of their ways of learning are ones that this resource has adopted and implemented, incorporated into the ways in which it presents information and engages our students. So this bar modeling is a methodology that your students in second grade and beyond. Second grade will be introduced, as Mrs. Ferrebee mentioned. So that's the year that they come to understand this better. We'll all understand it better as we move through it this year. And then our students will continue to apply that strategy to helping them solve problems, this bar modeling idea. Okay.
Right, and I think that, when we think of how we rolled out all at once, what's nice as a resource is there's a transition guide.
That's a really important point. I'm glad you brought that up.
And the transition guide is broken down by skills. So it allows a teacher to see, if I was working on addition, what they learned in first grade, all the strategies, then they lead into second grade. So by the time they get to fifth grade, I have kind of a large map that allows me to see where they came from and then potentially what they need to complete that task or that skill at this particular grade level.
So I would imagine that will be a very helpful resource to teachers this year, to be able to access what's happening for students the years prior as well as the years beyond. So I'm glad that you pointed that out. And even with our students transitioning from a different resource last year, the Everyday Math resource, to this resource, there are gaps, and there are components in the resource that will help us to recognize those gaps, or where they have strengths, and maybe where we don't need to dedicate as much time. But these are considerations that we're making as we support our students and their success with this new resource, because there will be differences for them.
There will be, and I think one of the big differences you'll notice is that parents are used to a study link book that comes home, whether it was torn out in the primary and handed out as worksheets, or in the upper grades where they just work through it. Homework may look a little bit different this year.
So no homework because there's no homework book?
Well, you know what, homework will be a little bit different.
Okay.
With research, I think one of the things that this program supports is that you don't need to do 50 problems on one basic skill to show or demonstrate that you understand the concept. The philosophy is they'll send home either a worksheet, so there might be just a worksheet to complete. It could be something from the student book, which the students actually have a hard book now, a little different than the student reference book that maybe was just something extra to help with strategies.
Okay.
This is everything that they work through the lesson, like the examples I said where they're having the pieces, and then they have the concrete, and then the pictorial, and then the abstract. So while there will be homework, I think it might be less than what they're used to. And I think parents need to understand that it may be less. I don't think there won't be any homework, because I think it's important to establish some of those practices so that the students understand. The goal is that they should be able to do it a little bit more independently, and on some of the worksheets or within the book, they're modeled a little bit more.
Okay, so we were sort of giggling through that because Mrs. Lester is fielding the questions, and there's a delay so that she has an opportunity to review the questions and the comments before we actually address them. And somebody wrote a very positive comment about the idea that there might not be any homework, and it was cute. It was funny. Yes. So there will be homework. It'll be presented to our students a little bit differently, if I hear you correctly.
Right, and it may come from different sources. It's not going to be in a homework workbook anymore.
Yeah, good.
And I think it might be a little bit more manageable than some of the homework with Everyday Math.
Oh, okay. Well, that certainly is sweet. I mean, that is something that we all appreciate. Good. Excellent. So what else do we need to be thinking about? You mentioned that the sections, as I'm calling them, just to be generic through Math in Focus, are now called chapters. So there's a pre-test, there's a chapter test. I think
there is, and I think one thing to note, the chapter test actually says test prep, and that's just the language that the company uses based on how it was developed with Singapore. So if you see something that says test prep, please know that is the summative assessment that happens at the end of a chapter.
Okay, that's important to point out, because I think that could be confusing.
It was confusing to us.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes. And we are still reporting on the standards, so that a couple of things. The tests will be aligned to our standards, just as they were in the past. Their math tests will be aligned to standards, and when our teachers report out to you progress on the part of their students at each of the trimester points in the school year, it will be a standards-based reporting system. It will continue, and we will have cover sheets for our assessments for our chapter tests, our test preps, just as we have in the past, so that you'll get a sense of which questions on the test align to which standards. And recall that there used to be 11 math standards with the old PA academic standards. Now there are 4 standard categories. So they really collapsed the standards in mathematics when they shifted to the PA core standards. It's just a different way of organizing what it is our students need to know and be able to do.
Right.
So we will still be reporting out on the standards.
And fifth grade will have that combination of letter grade and standard.
Excellent. Good point. So we have shifted our 5th grade students to receiving a letter grade and an average, numerical average. Again, in support of that transition as they're preparing to move on to the middle school.
But we still have the connection to the standards because that's important to note.
Excellent point. Yes, very good. Thank you. So what are some other things that we should be thinking about as my child now begins their math experience with Math in Focus?
I think one of the things that's nice that kind of continues is that there's still a letter to the parents that's introducing them to the topic of the chapter. In addition, in the book, there's a glossary and there's also a chapter wrap-up. And the chapter wrap-up is nice because it's a little map that kind of shows you what they should be able to do with specific strategies and approaches to solve that certain skill. So it's in the book. The students will most likely be bringing their books home on a regular basis, but it gives them an opportunity for you to see where they're going. Okay,
so the idea that they bring their books home, that's an interesting one too, because this resource provides our students all with a hard copy textbook as well as an online version of the textbook. So some of our students, we're realizing, actually prefer the online version, and that's okay. So they may not bring this textbook home. Everything in this textbook is accessible online. So every student will be provided a username and a password to access this resource.
Right. And the chapter wrap-up, this again is a 3rd grade book, and it says numbers to 10,000. But you can kind of see the breakdown of what they're expected to know by the end of the chapter. And it's really nice because it kind of lays it out instead of having to go through lesson by lesson and try and figure out what were the important or the key points.
Great. So here it is, right here for parents, for teachers. This is the wrap-up.
Correct.
Excellent. Good. Some other resources for parents, I'm glad you brought that up. So in addition to that letter that parents will receive at the beginning of each new chapter, we will continue to provide you with information via this format. I've started to do some live streaming on Facebook, and I've started in a very simple way, but we'll add to that. And if there are things that we can share with you to help you be better informed, particularly in this area where there are some changes, major changes this year for students, we want to keep you informed. So these digital modes of sharing information will continue for you. That's a resource for you. Additionally, I know that principals tomorrow night at Meet the Teacher Night are all planning in each of the 4 elementary schools to present to you more detailed information about mathematics. And if you're tuned in tonight, you're going to hear some of the same things tomorrow night that we have shared with you this evening, but maybe it will give you a chance to develop some questions or to share out some comments or some of your thinking if you are present for both presentations. But regardless, all parents tomorrow evening for Meet the Teacher Night will have an opportunity to attend a 30-minute session with their child's principal and learn more about mathematics from the principal. That'll be an important resource, I hope, because we'll post that online. We'll post that PowerPoint. And then I wanted to mention that October 19th, the company, the publisher of Math in Focus, actually sponsors a presentation called Parent University. So we have it scheduled to occur or take place at Middle School East in the auditorium there, hoping for lots of parents to come out and again engage with the presenter about this resource, what it means for your child, what it means for you, how you can engage with us, work with us to support your child. That'll be from 7 to 8:30 at night on Wednesday, October 19th. I was checking which day of the week. And that'll be that's actually called the Math in Focus Parent University. And we have that on our website. We'll continue to promote that. You can always ask questions at parent conferences. They're coming up in November during that week of Thanksgiving where they typically occur. And of course, your number one resource really is your teacher. Your child's teacher is your number one resource, and I hope that nobody hesitates to reach out to teachers with questions about this on behalf of their children or yourselves. In addition, we have a STEM curriculum coordinator. Her name is Julie Mest. Mrs. Mest will also be available to address questions about the curriculum, the instructional practices, the resources that we're using, and again, the experiences of our students. And of course, you can always reach out to me. I always appreciate engaging with parents, and I'm happy to address any questions you may have as we move through this new program. So as we're sitting here, we're watching Mrs. Lester. She's posing a question for us that Mrs. Ferrebee and I will take a minute to read and then address.
I think to clarify the question, we'll double check and make sure that we're correct about rote memory.
Okay.
I think it's a balance.
Good point.
You want to memorize your times tables. Your addition facts, your multiplication facts, the more fluent you are with those and the quicker that you can recall them, the better it is to help with all problems. When we think of rote memory, it's a balance. When we were working with the trainer this summer, she put a subtraction problem up, and she showed us how we typically teach the children, they kind of remember all the steps in that process. We want to get them so they're able to do it, but we don't want them just to memorize it without really understanding why they're doing what they're doing. And I think that's a big shift.
Okay, good to know. I mean, that idea...
We don't just want to work through it.
Okay, very good. So the rote memory piece versus the understanding, the deeper understanding. Okay, so we have another question.
This other question is a little lengthier, right? I'm not going to be able to write it out. If the children are working more in a group environment, how is one student going to be provided oversight so that they are not always leading the discussion? If one student is not comfortable or confident in their ability, what tools are going to be used to pull the student into the discussions? And when will students receive their username and password for online textbooks?
We're working with the online piece. We're still getting that into place, I think.
You need to repeat the question.
Yeah, okay. So I'll just summarize this question, and you're going to see it eventually. I know there's a delay, but you're going to see it eventually on the screen. But essentially, how do we hold all students accountable in group settings? If they're working collaboratively with other students, how do we make sure that one student isn't really dominating and gaining confidence and an understanding while maybe some others are not? So how do we progress monitor that? And the second half of the question posed was, when will our students get their username and password so that they can access the online version of this textbook? So you mentioned about the access.
I think that's coming. Not every teacher has gotten to that point. So I think over the next couple of weeks, that information should be coming out. With regards to knowing what the children are capable of doing, the only way to demonstrate a problem isn't going to be just in group work. So they might be initially discussing a particular problem or solving it. This allows the teacher to monitor the classroom and walk around and hear the dialogue that's happening. But then as the children work back into the book and they start to work through the different problems, as the teacher again is walking around and watching, you can see whether or not they're able to demonstrate their ability to solve it. And by posing different types of questions. So the teacher's going to be asking a lot more specific questions and getting all the children engaged.
Okay, and also I'm thinking about sometimes that, would you say that sometimes students have specific roles? So they are obligated to participate in the collaborative process.
Right,
of the group
and
work.
I think that's just in every classroom. They may find different strategies to pull the children out that may not be sharing all the time, if that's what you're referring to.
Yeah, so that's another way that our students can actually be held accountable in these group situations. And the other thing that I also notice, and I know that our teachers engage in, is they bring the students to them and create a small group fairly regularly, if not every day, so that the teacher has an opportunity to actually speak directly almost with every student in the class as they rotate through sometimes these group activities.
Even if they're working in a whole group and they may not be pulled back in a small group, it would just be like with reading. You're just going to kneel down next to the student and ask a particular child to maybe reiterate or explain it in their own words now.
Great. Very good. Good. I was prompted as I saw some of the questions up here. Just to add, I'm going to go back to parent resources for a second, and I apologize that I forgot this. But in addition to some of the resources that we mentioned to support you, there is another very lengthy list that's been developed by our principals that will be shared with you and available. There are some really good quality YouTube videos that in just a few minutes help introduce you to this bar modeling concept, for example, and the use of some of the manipulatives. So we'll provide you with links to some of those resources, just another way for you to get a sense of how this resource moves our students through mathematics this year. Okay, and we will continue to update you on the resources and provide you information about that. That's very important. So we have another question. So we have 4th grade took CDTs. Can you enlighten us on the test and results? Okay, wonderful question. So Mrs. Ferrebee mentioned the idea of pre-assessments, that this resource includes pre-assessments at the beginning of every chapter, and they're not graded, or at least they're not reported out on,
right.
I should say.
We may grade them.
They're certainly graded.
Right, and they guide our instruction.
Yeah, I didn't say that right.
That's
so
okay.
Thank you.
No problem. That's what I'm here for.
But they help teachers to know where students have gaps or where they have strengths, and how they should organize their instruction or differentiate their instruction, as we often say. Another test that your child may participate in is called the CDT, or the Classroom Diagnostic Test. And this is an online assessment that the state has produced. And our students can participate in this, and a teacher can get a sense of where a student is towards proficiency of all standards, all learning targets that are expected by the end of the year. So if your child happened to just take a CDT this week, and many of our students did, as our
or
teachers...
potentially a foresight.
Yeah, or a foresight.
Mm-hmm.
It's very similar in terms of its purpose. If your child just participated, the teachers are going to use that information to guide their instruction. Sometimes we learn that students don't need to review some of these early concepts, or they don't need to be presented these early concepts, but instead we can move ahead because they're prepared. CDTs, foresight, help us to know where students are with respect to these expected learning targets, and help teachers then respond accordingly. So if your child took that test, that's the purpose of that test. Very similar to foresight. And some buildings, it's really a preference on the part of the teachers and the principal. CDTs can take some time, so that's sort of a negative about the CDTs, but they are extremely informative once a student completes them. They're online, and that takes some getting used to for our students. They're taking an assessment online. Some of them are more comfortable with that than others, versus foresight, which is another formative assessment that many of our students take, but it's paper pencil. They're filling in a bubble. So we have different ways of formatively assessing our students, all for the same purpose,
right.
All helping our teachers to know where our students are as learners and what they should do to continue to push them forward.
And it's really directed more towards the teachers to inform instruction rather
Yes.
than it's not graded and put on the report card.
Right, so it's formative. So when I say formative, exactly, It's not graded, but it's really used to inform our teachers of what needs to happen for kids. Great. Okay, are there any other questions? Is there anything that you can think of that in this brief presentation we've left out, or that we should include?
No, I think we're okay.
So the intent was to provide you with a brief introduction to the resource, and hopefully get you started thinking about what you're wondering, what you're going to soon notice with your child and their work in math, and then what questions again are prompted, and we want you to reach out. Along the way this year, we will continue to keep you informed, and hopefully it will help you to be a strong partner with us and working with your child. All right, so to Mrs. Ferrebee, thank you very much for joining us and sharing from the perspective of a teacher how this resource will serve our students and teachers this year. We will continue to learn more. As I said, Mrs. Lester, thank you. She ran the camera for us, and she will be producing. She'll archive this, and it'll be posted. And to all of you that tuned in, thank you very much. If you tune in later, Thank you for that too. We really appreciate you engaging with us in this way and hope that you'll provide us feedback to let us know how this serves and meets your needs. Thanks very much. Have a good evening.